The ultimatum, the Sovereignty Armada emerged from hyperspace like a plague of metal locusts, their ships numbering in the thousands, each vessel a monument to centuries of conquest and technological superiority. They positioned themselves just beyond Neptune's orbit, with the precision of predators who had performed this dance countless times before. 5,000 warships arranged in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with energy shields that had never known defeat. Commander Elena Vasquez stood at the center of Earth Defense Command, her weathered hands gripping the tactical console as data streams painted a picture of certain doom across every screen. The numbers didn't lie. Earth had 300 ships. The Sovereignty had brought 5,000. Each of their vessels outgunned humanity's best cruisers by a factor of 10. Their shields could withstand direct nuclear strikes. Their weapons had turned entire moons to dust in previous conquests. The communication request came exactly when expected. The Sovereignty always followed the same playbook, the same ritual of dominance they had perfected across 100 conquered worlds. Elena accepted the transmission, and the main view screen filled with the imposing figure of Executor Krell Nash, a being whose crystalline form seemed to absorb and refract light in ways that hurt human eyes to perceive directly. His voice resonated through the command center like grinding stone, translated by their systems into something approximating human speech. Species designation: human. You have been evaluated and found suitable for integration into the Sovereignty. Your technological development, while primitive, shows promise. Your biological diversity will enhance our collective. You have 1 solar rotation to accept our generous terms of surrender. Refuse and your species will be reduced to genetic samples for our archives. The transmission ended without ceremony. Around Elena, her staff sat in stunned silence. Lieutenant Morrison was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. Commander, our projections show we could hold them off for maybe 6 hours. 7 if we're lucky. Elena turned from the screen, a strange smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She reached into her uniform pocket and withdrew a small device no bigger than a playing card, its surface completely black, seeming to absorb the light around it. Morrison, clear the room. Security-level Omega protocols are now in effect. As the confused staff filed out, leaving only her most trusted officers, Elena pressed her thumb to the device. It hummed once, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She spoke clearly into it. Authorization Vasquez 77 Alpha. Initiate Project Phantom. The shadows rise. Across the solar system, in places that existed on no official map, in facilities that had been built in spaces between spaces, humanity's true defenders stirred to life. For 60 years, while the galaxy watched Earth stumble through its first steps into space, while alien observers dismissed humans as another unremarkable species barely worth noticing, the greatest minds of Earth had been working on something unprecedented. They hadn't tried to match alien technology through conventional means. They hadn't attempted to build bigger guns or stronger shields. Instead, they had gone sideways, pursuing a branch of physics that other species had dismissed as theoretical impossibility. Dimensional phase shifting. The ability to exist in multiple states simultaneously, to be nowhere and everywhere at once. Dr. Marcus Chen had been 23 when he made the breakthrough, scribbling equations on a cafe napkin that would change everything. The math was elegant in its simplicity, terrifying in its implications. Space wasn't just space. It was layers upon layers of reality, each one slightly out of phase with the others. And with the right technology, the right understanding, you could slip between those layers like walking through curtains. The first successful test had been a probe the size of a softball. It had vanished from one side of the lab and reappeared on the other, having passed through solid matter as if it didn't exist. The second test had been a fighter craft with a volunteer pilot who emerged grinning, reporting that he had flown through Jupiter's core and felt nothing but a slight chill. Now, hidden in dimensional pockets that existed parallel to normal space, 2,000 ships powered up their shadow cores. These weren't the crude vessels that the Sovereignty's scouts had catalogued. These were something entirely different. Their hulls were composed of programmable matter that could shift between solid and ethereal states in nanoseconds. Their weapons didn't fire projectiles or energy beams. They reached through dimensions to simply turn portions of enemy ships into quantum probability clouds. Captain James Park commanded one of these shadow vessels, the Wraith's Dream. He felt the familiar sensation of reality bending around him as his ship's core fully activated. Through his neural interface, he could sense his fellow shadow captains across the system, 2,000 minds linked in shared purpose. They had trained for this moment in simulations so realistic that many had needed therapy to distinguish them from reality. They had memorized every known sovereignty battle formation, studied every weakness, prepared for every contingency. Elena watched her personal display as hidden sensors throughout the system reported ready status. 2,000 green lights, each representing a ship that officially didn't exist, crewed by people who had volunteered to disappear from public record to serve in Earth's ultimate contingency plan. She opened a channel to the Shadow Fleet. All vessels, this is command. You've trained for this moment. You've sacrificed everything for this moment. Now we show the galaxy that humanity doesn't bow. Phase 1 authorized. Make them wonder. Meanwhile, aboard the Sovereignty flagship Inevitable Dominion, Executor Krell Nash reviewed the tactical data with the casual arrogance of absolute superiority. His tactical advisor, a 6-armed creature called Vertex, was running standard invasion scenarios. The humans have moved their pathetic fleet into defensive positions around Earth. They seem to believe their nuclear weapons and kinetic barriers will make a difference. Krell Nash's crystalline form pulsed with what passed for amusement among his kind. They always believe they're special. Every species thinks they'll be the one to resist. Run the fear protocols. Let them see what happened to the Altarians when they refused our generosity. The Sovereignty broadcast the recordings across all Earth's communication channels. Cities turned to glass, worlds stripped of atmosphere, billions reduced to ash in minutes. It was psychological warfare perfected over millennia, designed to break spirits before the first shot was fired. But something was wrong. The humans weren't responding with the expected panic. Their communication channels remained steady. Their defensive positions held firm. If anything, there seemed to be an undercurrent of anticipation. Elena received the footage and deleted it without watching. She'd seen it before, studied it, in fact, looking for weaknesses in sovereignty tactics. They relied too heavily on overwhelming force, on the psychology of terror. They had never faced an enemy that could simply choose not to exist in the same dimensional space as their weapons. She activated her command link. Shadow Fleet Phase 2. Let's introduce ourselves. Across the solar system, space began to ripple. What looked like gravitational distortions at first gradually resolved into something more deliberate. The Sovereignty sensors screamed warnings as massive objects began to phase into existence, but the readings made no sense. The objects were there but not there, solid but incorporeal, existing in states that their computers couldn't properly process. One by one, 2,000 human vessels materialized in perfect formation, surrounding the Sovereignty Armada in a sphere that defied conventional tactical logic. They hadn't traveled there. They had simply always been there, just one dimension removed from detection. Vertex's 6 arms flew across his console in panic. Executor, this is impossible. Our sensors detected nothing. There was no hyperspace signature, no energy buildup, no warning. Krell Nash's form flickered, the first sign of uncertainty his crew had ever seen from him. He studied the readings, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The human ships were unlike anything in their databases. Their energy signatures suggested they were powered by controlled singularities, but that was absurd. No species had ever successfully weaponized dimensional physics. The few who had tried had destroyed themselves in the attempt. Elena opened a channel to the Sovereignty flagship. This time, she was the one in control. Executor Krell Nash. I'm Commander Elena Vasquez of Earth Defense Command. You gave us one rotation to consider your terms. We've considered them. Our answer is no. Before Krell Nash could respond, she nodded to her tactical officer. Demonstrate. The shadow ship designated Phantom Strike, positioned directly above a Sovereignty-heavy cruiser, began to phase. It didn't move in any conventional sense. Instead, it simply started existing in the same space as the enemy vessel, its matter occupying the same dimensional coordinates, but on a different phase frequency. For a moment, both ships seemed to merge, becoming a ghostly double image. Then Phantom Strike shifted fully into normal space, inside the Sovereignty cruiser's shield bubble, inside its armor, its shadow core materializing directly adjacent to the enemy's main reactor. The Sovereignty crew had exactly 3 seconds to understand what was happening before Phantom Strike's phase field expanded, turning a perfect sphere of the cruiser's internal structure into quantum foam. The cruiser didn't explode. It simply stopped working. A third of its mass had been converted to probability clouds, leaving gaps in its structure that looked like bites taken by an invisible monster. Life support failed. Engines died, weapons powered down. The crew survived, but their ship was now an iron coffin drifting in space. Phantom Strike phased back out, reappearing in its original position as if nothing had happened. The entire demonstration had taken less than 10 seconds. The awakening, the silence that followed, was absolute. 5,000 sovereignty warships, representing the combined might of 300 conquered systems, sat motionless as their crews tried to process what they had just witnessed. In the span of 10 seconds, everything they knew about warfare had become obsolete. Executor Krell Nash stood frozen at his command station, his crystalline form flickering through spectrums of light that his crew had never seen before. Fear. The Executor was experiencing fear, possibly for the first time in his extended existence. His tactical displays showed the impossible. 2,000 human vessels that their sensors could barely track, each one theoretically capable of doing to his entire fleet what had just been demonstrated on a single cruiser. But pride and protocol demanded action. Krell Nash's form solidified, pulsing with aggressive energy. All vessels, initiate Protocol 7. Overwhelming force authorized. Destroy them all! The Sovereignty fleet erupted into action. Weapons that could crack moons opened fire, filling space with enough destructive energy to sterilize entire solar systems. Beams of coherent plasma, volleys of antimatter torpedoes, waves of dimensional disruptors that were supposedly impossible to defend against, all converged on the human shadow fleet. They hit nothing. The moment the Sovereignty opened fire, every human shadow ship phase shifted, becoming ghostly afterimages of themselves. The devastating barrage passed through them as if they were mirages, the destructive energy continuing on into empty space. A few stray shots reached Earth's conventional fleet, but even those were mysteriously deflected by what looked like localized space-time distortions. Captain Park watched the fireworks from his command chair aboard Wraith's Dream, feeling the familiar disorientation of existing between dimensions. Through his neural link, he could sense his crew's mixture of exhilaration and terror. They were dancing on the edge of physics itself, one miscalculation away from spreading their atoms across 17 dimensions. "Tactical, give me a soft target," he ordered. "Something big and scary that won't cause too many casualties when we take it down." His tactical officer, Lieutenant Sarah Kim, highlighted a Sovereignty dreadnought, one of their command vessels bristling with weapons. "The Eternal Supremacy, Captain. Crew of 3,000, mostly military. Their commander has a reputation for unnecessary brutality." Park smiled grimly. "Perfect. All hands prepare for deep phase insertion. We're going to give them a lesson in humility." Wraith's Dream didn't just phase through the dreadnought's defenses. It materialized inside the ship's bridge, the shadow vessel's compact form suddenly occupying the same space as the Sovereignty's command center. For a horrifying moment, both crews could see each other through the dimensional barrier, humans looking at terrified aliens who were experiencing their first taste of true vulnerability. Park stood from his chair, walking to the very edge of his bridge where the dimensional barrier shimmered. On the other side, mere inches away but separated by the fundamental fabric of reality, stood the Sovereignty commander, a creature that looked like living mercury formed into a vaguely humanoid shape. "Your shields mean nothing," Park said, knowing the translation systems would carry his words. "Your armor is irrelevant. We can reach you anywhere, anytime. We choose not to kill you. Remember that." Wraith's Dream's shadow core pulsed once, sending out a targeted phase wave that selectively shifted every weapon system on the dreadnought into a different dimensional frequency. The weapons didn't destroy themselves. They simply ceased to exist in the same reality as the rest of the ship. With surgical precision, the shadow ship then phase shifted back out, leaving the Eternal Supremacy defenseless but intact. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Shadow ships appeared inside enemy vessels, disabling weapons, engines, and shields without causing a single casualty. It was a demonstration of such precise control, such overwhelming technological superiority, that many Sovereignty crews simply shut down their systems rather than continue fighting. But not all of them surrendered so easily. War Commander Thexville, commanding a strike force of 500 vessels, attempted to break formation and target Earth directly. If they couldn't fight the Shadow Fleet, perhaps they could at least complete their mission through sheer brutality. Elena had anticipated this. Shadow Wings 7 through 12, Implement containment protocol. Show them why that's a bad idea. 600 shadow ships phase-shifted simultaneously, not to attack but to create something unprecedented. They formed a dimensional barrier around Thexival's force, their shadow cores working in perfect synchronization to create a pocket of space that existed slightly out of phase with normal reality. To those trapped inside, it seemed as if the universe beyond had simply disappeared, replaced by an endless void. Thexival's ships could move, but they couldn't leave. They could fire their weapons, but the energy dissipated into dimensional nothing. They were trapped in a bubble of space-time that humanity had effectively removed from the normal universe. "This is Commander Vasquez," Elena broadcast to the trapped force. "You're currently experiencing dimensional isolation. You exist, but you're removed from our reality by approximately 0.7 phase frequencies. We can maintain this field indefinitely. We can also collapse it, which would scatter your atoms across 17 dimensions. Or we can release you. If you power down your weapons and surrender, you have 30 seconds to decide." 20 seconds later, 500 sovereignty warships powered down simultaneously. The battle, if it could even be called that, had lasted less than an hour. Of the 5,000 sovereignty vessels that had arrived to conquer Earth, nearly 4,000 were now disabled or contained. The remainder huddled in defensive formations, their crews paralyzed by indecision and terror. Executor Krell Nash stood in his darkened bridge, emergency lighting casting strange shadows through his crystalline form. Half his command staff had abandoned their posts. The other half stared at their useless tactical displays, trying to comprehend how the most powerful fleet in the galaxy had been neutralized by a species they had dismissed as primitive. The communication system activated, and Elena's face appeared on the main screen. But this time she wasn't alone. Behind her stood representatives from Earth's various nations, scientists who had developed the shadow technology, and most importantly, ordinary citizens who had volunteered to serve in the Shadow Fleet, sacrificing their normal lives to protect their world. "Executor," Elena began, her voice carrying neither triumph nor mockery, just firm resolve. "We could destroy your entire fleet. We choose not to. We could invade your worlds as easily as you attempted to invade ours. We choose not to. Humanity has a saying, speak softly and carry a big stick. We've shown you our stick. Now let's speak." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "You will withdraw your fleet immediately. You will inform the sovereignty that Earth is off limits now and forever. Any future attempts at invasion or coercion will be met with a response that goes beyond defense. We have 2,000 shadow ships here. We have 10,000 more in reserve, and we're building more every day. But more importantly, we're willing to share." Krell Nash's form flickered in surprise. "Share? You would share this technology?" "Not the technology itself," Lena clarified, "but its protection. Any species that seeks genuine alliance with Earth, any civilization that respects sovereignty and freedom, can call upon our Shadow Fleet for defense. We won't conquer, we won't subjugate, but we will protect those who cannot protect themselves." The offer hung in space between them, more shocking than any weapon. The sovereignty had built their empire on the principle that might makes right, that the strong naturally dominated the weak. Here was a species with the power to dominate the galaxy, choosing instead to be its guardian. "And if we refuse?" Krell Nash asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Elena's expression hardened. "Then we demonstrate what our Shadow Fleet can do when we stop being polite. Your homeworld is 17 light-years from here. Our shadow ships don't travel through normal space. We could be there in hours, not years. Every defense you have, every fortress, every fleet is meaningless against an enemy that can simply choose not to exist in the same dimensional phase as your weapons. Make your choice, Executor. Withdrawal and peace, or a war you cannot win." The silence stretched for long moments. Around them, the crippled sovereignty fleet drifted like metal clouds, testament to humanity's newfound power. On Earth, 13 billion people held their breath, watching the feeds, waiting to see if their 60 years of secret preparation had been enough. Finally, Krell Nash's form shifted to what the xenobiologists would later identify as a gesture of submission. "We accept your terms. The sovereignty fleet will withdraw. Earth will be designated as a protected zone in our charts. But know this, humans, you have upset the balance of power that has existed for millennia. The consequences of this day will ripple across the galaxy." Elena nodded. "We're counting on it. The withdrawal took 3 days. Shadow ships escorted the limping sovereignty fleet to the edge of the solar system, ensuring they left, but also providing assistance to vessels too damaged to travel efficiently. It was a message in itself. Humanity was powerful enough to destroy, civilized enough to show mercy. As the last sovereignty vessel disappeared into hyperspace, Elena stood once again in Earth Defense Command. But now the screens showed something different. Messages were flooding in from across the galaxy. Species that had been under sovereignty control for centuries, asking if the rumors were true. Civilizations that had hidden in the dark spaces between empires, wondering if Earth might be the ally they had prayed for. Captain Park materialized on the command deck, his shadow ship having phase shifted directly into the fortified bunker. It was a casual display of power that would have been unthinkable just days ago. "Commander, the Shadow Fleet is requesting orders. Do we stand down?" Elena looked at the flood of messages, at the tactical displays showing 17 different Imperial fleets already mobilizing in response to the Sovereignty's defeat, at the future that was rapidly reshaping itself around humanity's emergence as a galactic power. "No, Captain. We don't stand down. We've just shown the galaxy that there's a new way to exist, a new form of strength that doesn't require oppression. Some will see us as a threat. Others will see us as hope. Either way, the Shadow Fleet's work has just begun." She turned to address the entire command center, her words being broadcast to Shadow Fleet vessels throughout the system. "For 60 years we prepared in secret for a war we hoped would never come. That war lasted 1 hour. But what comes next? The responsibility of being strong enough to protect but wise enough not to conquer. That's the real challenge. The galaxy is watching. Let's show them what humanity really stands for." Outside, in the space between spaces, 2,000 shadow ships maintained their vigil. They were invisible to conventional sensors, but present nonetheless. Guardians that existed in the margins of reality. The galaxy had expected Earth's surrender. Instead, they had awakened something far more transformative, a species that had mastered the ultimate power and chosen to use it not for conquest, but for protection. The age of empires built on fear was ending. The age of shadows that protected the light had just begun.